Brent Allen Winters, Declaration of 76, United States Constitution, a common lawyer, comments clause by clause. Clause 10. He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. Comment. The tyrant also, known by his doings, see this handbook, U.S. Declaration of 76, Clause 30, and comment, forever tries to replace common law's adversarial spoken, oral, and public jury trials with civil law's inquisitional secret tribunals, using admiralty, martial, and canon law. Local court authority must arise direct from the jury, ensuring trial by jury, not by government. The soul of the common law is its courts. The heart of its courts are the jury. As long as the heart throbs, the soul quickens. As long as juries decide cases, freedom is alive. Government cannot be total. Here our declaration charges the king with violating common law's separation of powers requirement. By stopping the establishment of judiciary powers, he meant to displace the power of the common law courts to interpret the law with his will. More to the point, by disallowing courts, he does away with the jury, thereby putting all litigants at his mercy in admiralty tribunals and not that of their neighbors or peers. Again, the British powers that be, by declaring the common law, has no authority in the colonies, replaced the jury with civil law's admiralty courts. The several revenue acts, said the First Continental Congress, which extend the powers of the admiralty courts beyond their ancient limits, deprive the American of trial by jury. The king and his cronies' goal was to keep their monopolies of power over trade, East India Company, and banking, England's central bank, be fed with tax revenues collected using British bayonets and Hessian swords. And Hessians are the Germans. But to do so required bringing the colonists under control of admiralty law, which uses no jury. Never forget, says Devlin, without trial by jury, all are under the merciless power of the state. Tyrants seek to overwhelm or diminish trial by jury, for no tyrant could afford to leave a subject's freedom in the hands of 12 of his countrymen. So that trial by jury is more than an instrument of justice and more than one wheel of the Constitution. It is the lamp that shows that freedom lives. Clause 11. He has made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount of payment of their salaries. Comment. In civil law countries, most all of the world, a judge is a member of the civil service ranks, dependent upon the state for the employment and pay. He is the rubber stamp, substituting the state's will for law. In short, he's a kept man. In fact, he's not a judge but an enforcer of state codes. Though a government lackey, his judgecraft keeps up appearances of government fairness. Here, our declaration again charges King George with violating common law's separation of powers requirement by substituting his will for that of the judges. Where King George was unable to do away with the courts altogether, he made judges dependent on him alone for their jobs and pay. Magna Carta, however, requires judges to follow the law of the land, not the mere will of the government. We, the Crown, will not make, i.e., appoint justices, constables, sheriffs, or bailiffs who do not know the law of the land and mean to observe it well. Judges, said Sam Adams, ought never be dependent on any man or body of men. Judges are to follow due process, not the government's will. Even so-called exceptions must vindicate due process, never to change it. Our national motto is, in God we trust. To trust God is to rely upon His unchanging laws, i.e. the laws of nature's God. In Clause 1, in fact, any trying to break the laws of nature's God will instead break himself on them. Thus said the old continental soldier was the arm of British power in America dislocated. Clause 12. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. Comment. Civil law-minded government imposes between you and the jury layers of bureaucrats with their administrative law. As a tangled matting of brambles, these not only keep you from trial by jury, but also from a fair and impartial hearing before a neutral judge. Administrative courts, being of the civil law, use no jury, and their judges are kept men, dependents, holding their jobs and pay at the pleasure of the governor or president. Carl Llewellyn, after decades of consideration, noted three things of administrative law. First, it is a late arrival in our common law country. Second, it is a detour from the trail through which parties must struggle in their quest for justice. Third, this detour from justice's trail leads into the wilds of government and politics and queer events in both. The common law tradition is intolerant of professional bureaucrats, law enforcement agents, and prosecutors, which are all part and parcel of the civil law tradition, the enemy and antagonist of common law. In fact, professional prosecutors and armed police were never part of the British American colonist world. See this handbook, U.S. Constitution Amendment 2, and comment. In England, professional prosecutors are still scarce. Until recent times, London's bobbies remained unarmed. In New England, armed police were uncommon until at least 1825. Simply put, the colonials' common law way of life distrusted government police with guns, requiring instead that the people arm themselves. Administrative law, a form of civil law, had spread from Babylon to ancient cities, reaching from the Vatican during the 11th century. It infected all Europe, spawning bureaucrats and administrative codes. Appearing under many labels, it reached a zenith in revolutionary France, putting the will of rulers for true law. It keeps the one wronged from his day before the jury. Clause 13. He has kept among us in times of peace standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. Comment. Where armies occupy, martial law commands, displacing common law. The common law tradition is intolerant of standing armies because such an army tempts office holders to use it to spread martial law. The fundamental form of civil law, says Sam Adams, purely imperial. It commands obedience or punishment. A standing military force with an overgrown executive, president, will not long be safe companions to liberty. The means of defense against foreign danger have been always the instruments of tyranny at home. James Madison. By contrast, our common law depends for the common defense upon the militia, the people, whether summoned for impaneling on the grand or petit jury, or for mustering armed, ever ready to fall in ranks and fight. In both cases, the one summoned is to come equipped to do his constitutional duty. For jury duty, armed with the knowledge of his power over the facts and the verdict. For militia duty, armed as the Second Amendment requires, yet, unlike standing armies and lifetime judges, posing no threat to freedom. In addition, the professional soldier of the standing army tends more to fight for career and pay, and therefore to obey for pay, whereas the militiaman's passion for the fight focuses on hearth and home. Unlike the professional soldier, he is not career-minded and therefore less likely to obey an unlawful order. Bottom line, standing armies, as also career judges, prosecutors, and policemen, whether in peace or war, become impatient, result-minded administrators, often unwilling to protect personal rights. As the common law and scripture trust the jury over a government employee judge, the loyal American trusts the militia over a standing army. Clause 4. He is affected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. Comment. King and Parliament were trying to avoid common law's time-consuming procedures, called due process, or the course of the common law with martial law commands. As all forms of civil law, martial law demands instant obedience in attempt to command the future. Common law, on the other hand, searches the past to understand the future, seeking truth in light of past acts done. In short, civil law speculates what is right and commands it. Common law judges in hindsight. Hence, martial law, though needful in battle and preparations for war, must remain, as all civil law, subject to common law's due process. Our Constitution puts its armed forces under command of a non-military commander-in-chief, the President, and requires him to act only at the advice and consent of the Senate. Likewise, the ancient common law required the commander-in-chief of the militia, Fridfair, to serve at the advice and consent of the elders, called the Witan. After Magna Carta, kings sought the advice and consent of the barons and later yet of Parliament. Because King George turned his British army and Hessians loose to disband the colonies' militia and humble them, our Constitution now subjects soldiers to our common law courts in non-military matters, and allows the President to wage war only after Congress has declared war and provided money, which is never to be for more than 2 years at a time, preventing open-ended military excursions lasting longer. Clause 15. He is combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation. Comment. The Constitution, this, Clause 15, references is England's common law. By displacing the common law with a law foreign to the colonists' English Constitution, King George and his cronies did away with common law freedoms. Paragraph 15 also accuses George III of conspiracy, an agreement to commit a crime proven by action aimed to completing that crime. Accordingly, our declaration here shifts from the lone pronoun he, King George, to he has combined with others, co-conspirators, fellow dependents on the central bank's trading and offshoot monopolies. The culprits of Clause 15 to 24 are these conspirators. Clause 24, calling this cartel them, declaring themselves invested with the power to legislate. In fact, every abuse Clause 15 to 24 cites is one of the goals of George's having combined with others by giving his assent to their pretended legislation. As does the Federal Reserve Bank in our day, England's central bank enjoyed monopolies on issuing currency, trade using the East India Company, and receipt of tax revenues to service its loans, and further to fund enforcement of such taxation, all contrary to the English Constitution's common law rights against such monopolies. This clause shows that not only did the colonists have a good constitution in their common law government, but also their zeal was keen to keep it pure from strange law pollutants. a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution, admiralty law. The colonial Americans' British brethren had the same zeal for the common law. For instance, on 14 November 1770, the London Evening Post included the following against an English judge. In contempt of the common law of England, you introduce into the court jurisprudence unknown to Englishmen. The Roman Code, the law of nations, and the opinions of foreign civilians are your perpetual theme, but who ever heard you mention Magna Carta or the Bill of Rights with respect? By such treacherous arts, the noble simplicity and spirit of our Saxon laws were first corrupted. Our war for secession from Britain's empire was to enjoy our English Constitution, the same common law tradition the English demanded for themselves. In a word, our declaration says King George had conspired with the bank and trade monopolies to displace common law authority with civil law's admiralty power. Today, much as then, the general government, by overreaching the Admiralty Clause, uses admiralty law to control people and their property. Fundamental common law rights do not attach to matters within admiralty jurisdiction. Thus, government's unlawful use of admiralty law works to deny common law rights, such as the right to trial by jury, freedom from unreasonable searches and seizures, and the right to keep and bear arms. Admiralty law, a form of civil law, is good when kept to its proper use to govern shipping ships and those activities in direct relationship to these, but is downright dangerous when used ashore. See this handbook, U.S. Constitution, Article 3, Section 2, Clause 1, and comment discussing government's abuse of the Admiralty Clause. Legislation in the common law sense differs from the civil law sense. Common law legislation is by direct consent of the governed through their representatives and by direct consent of the jury, instance by instance. Civil law legislation is the enforced command of the state. Further, common law demands that legislation be constitutional, i.e., within common law principles, barring powerful men's legislating by decree through a president and an administrative admiralty law, bureaucrats' acts of pretended legislation.